analogy for like a non-believer and trying to, so like a person who's blind trying to understand light, a non-believer trying to understand, well, for me personally, before I was a Christian, it would have been trying to understand like how someone could put their faith into something that they can't see or like they can't prove that it's there. I mean, for me, it was like, how can you do that? And in the same way that he's like, oh, like he understood that you could, that seeing people could see someone across the room and go to them. It's kind of like, he understood that, but he didn't understand like how that actually worked. And same for me, I was like, I can see that you guys have faith like in something, like a relationship, but I didn't understand exactly like how you could put your faith in that. And I don't know, it was just like a perfect analogy for like a non-believer, well, for that specific thing. But and that the idea of me like not understanding the concept like of how you guys like how a Christian could do that just shows how much it was just God working like in me and through me, that actually, because there was no way that I could go from here to being who I am now if it wasn't through God, because there was like nothing that anyone could say to convince me that is like right. It was only through God. And in the same way, God worked through the mud that he put in. It wasn't the actual act of putting the mud in the eyes. That was just something that Jesus did. Jesus did like tons of different ways of doing miracles. It wasn't the actual act, or else we would be spitting in the ground and rubbing in people's eyes all the time, like trying to let them see and stuff. But no, it was, he did it in that way because it's like, it doesn't matter how I do this. It's God who's working through this. And in the same way, God worked through my life to make me a Christian. And in the same way, we need to work through relationships to allow people to see the light. Because, I mean, just sitting in a room, I mean, what's that going to do? I mean, if they're blind, like it says in the very end, I should put the verse up there. In the end, Jesus came to allow the blind to see. But, yeah, we need to work through relationships in order to do that. So to summarize everything, and try to make it as straightforward as possible of what I'm trying to say, is we are the light, and it doesn't say we should be the light. It says that we are the light. So we need to be like examples of what a life with Jesus looks like, and we need to build relationships to allow God to work through us. And and if God can work through like the simple act of rubbing mud in someone's eyes, imagine what he could do through the relationships with people. And one of the most important things is to understand that the only reason that we are the light is because of God. So that means that we need to be strongly connected with Him. So that means like reading our Bibles and praying to God and talking about Him with each other, so that we're able to do these other things. So, almost done. There's one last thing. So, figuring this all out, one thing that came to mind was like, why in my life is it so hard to go and build relationships with people and tell them about Jesus? And what I came to is, I feel like in those moments it feels like it would be like too awkward and it would be uncomfortable for me. So one of the questions that I thought of is my how comfortable I am more important than sharing Jesus with other people? So that's it. And now Tom gets to speak.
Okay, so I have 3 main points, so let's just get started. So, the first point is our stories about Jesus. So when I first read this, I kept on falling into this trap of thinking that
we're supposed to be like the man who gains his sight. That we're supposed to have our testimony like that. That we're supposed to be like that man. But then as I begin to look at it, I realize that the man actually doesn't do that much in the story. The man, when he gets the mud put in his eyes, all he does is he goes and washes it off. When the man returns, he doesn't know where Jesus is. I think that's kind of weird, because I imagine that if someone just gained their sight, they would go back and try to thank Jesus. So I thought that was kind of weird that he wouldn't try to find him. And then he gets taken to the Pharisees, and then after he gets taken out of the synagogue, he's just wandering around, and Jesus finds him. So all that to say, Jesus is the hero of this story. It's not the man. Jesus is the one who's important. So I was thinking that we often mess up, and we often are not perfect. But yeah. Sorry, going ahead of the slides. One thing is God works through weakness, and this is my story is my own testimony of God working in my weakness was. So I got diagnosed with cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma, a little bit less than a year ago, and that was a big deal for me. And I remember the first time after going to the first appointment, straight from my classes actually, up in Bellingham, and then going home from that, driving home, and I was by myself because my mom was in a different car. It just hit me that I have cancer and I could die, and that was really scary for me. And I remember just it hitting me and it being really hard. And then I turned on the radio, and this song came on by Matt Maher. It's called "Because He Lives," and one line really stuck out to me then, and I still remember it. It's the line that says, "Because He lives, I can face tomorrow. Because He lives, every fear is gone. I know He holds my life and my future in His hands." And that gave me enormous comfort. That gave me hope, and I felt that was a real feeling of God's presence in my life, and that was huge. And I decided then I was I gotta get to know God better, just because if God can do this, how can I not know Him better? So I'll have to say that I'm not the hero of my own story. Jesus is the hero. It was in my weakness. It was when I was feeling weak that really God came through, that Jesus came through. So I think regardless of how poorly we try on our own efforts, when we have Jesus in our lives, it will all work out. He can make something out of it. But when we don't have Jesus, we'll just we'll miss the mark. We won't be able to make it. Okay, so a second point is our relationship with Jesus is a process. I think you can see this in the man's life. So when after Jesus first heals him, the people ask, who is Jesus? And he just says, the man who is called Jesus anointed my eyes and whatever made me see. So he doesn't really understand who Jesus is. And then later, when the Pharisees ask him, I think he's analyzed it a little bit more by then. He realizes that this is kind of a crazy thing, that someone who was born blind would gain sight. So I think he calls Jesus a prophet or a man from God. And then finally, when he gets taken out of the synagogue and he meets Jesus, that's when he really calls him my Lord and he worships him. I think that sometimes for us, we get stuck in that second phase where we know God's power, but we don't really have that relationship with him. Because we don't meet him. I think that God wants us to meet him. I think he wants us to meet him by praying, by reading our Bibles, by worshiping. Yeah, how can we progress in our relationship with God if we don't see him? Because every time we see the man progress in his relationship, it was all because of Jesus. So if Jesus is not a big part of your life, then how will you move forward? And then finally, my third point, last point, is we will be different people. I think that we can see this in the story when the man is not recognized right after he gets healed. The people are like, wait, is this the same guy? And He's like, yeah, I'm the same guy. And then the Pharisees, who would imagine that someone who was begging a week ago would go and talk to the Pharisees like he did? Like he had a lot of courage, and that was pretty crazy. He kind of talks back to the Pharisees. I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I think that we need to have changed lives too. Like that's people should be able to say, wow, like that guy Brady is different now, different than he used to be. When I think of God changing us, I think of the C.S. Lewis quote. And can someone read that? Maybe.
Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, perhaps, you can understand what he is doing. He is getting the drains right and stopping the leaks in the roof and so on. You knew that those jobs needed doing, and so you were not surprised. But presently, he starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abdominally and does not seem to make any sense. What on earth is he up to? The explanation is that he is building quite a different house from the one you thought of. Throwing out a new wing here, putting on an extra floor there, running up towers, making courtyards. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, but he is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself.
Yeah, I think that in our story, the blind man probably wasn't expecting to get kicked out of the synagogue right after he gained sight. That's a pretty big deal for him, especially since his parents are still in there. So he kind of lost contact. He just gained sight. He hasn't really seen his parents before. And then he has to get excommunicated. That must have been really hard for him. But I think that God had a plan in it. And it made me think of this one verse where it talks about, and God wants us to change, but this verse in Matthew 7, 9 through 11, it says, what man is there among you, or what man is there among you who, when his son asks for a loaf, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he will not give him a snake, will he? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give what is good to those who ask him? Now this is a weird verse for this topic, but I think that it's important because God cares about us and he wants what's best for us. And I feel like sometimes we don't know what's best for us. I feel like sometimes we hope for stones and snakes in our lives. We think we need things that hurt us. We want things that don't matter, like a lot of money, a fortune, or fame, or whatever. But God cares about us, and He wants to give us what we actually need. And what we need is Jesus in our lives. That's what we're missing out on if we don't have. Jesus is the bread of life. He's the one that satisfies. So all this to say that God cares for us, and we need Him. He is the one that satisfies. He gives true meaning and true joy to our lives. I just don't want you guys to miss out on that. Give your life, give your everything to Jesus. He is worth it. And then here's some application questions that Brady has.
I'm just going to read them off the phone. So these are our application questions. I could read through them, or you guys could take a picture.
Read them.
Okay, I can read them. How valuable is our comfort? What does being the light of the world look like? In what way is Jesus the hero of our story, of your story? Wow. How do you need to meet Jesus more? How do you need to meet Jesus more in your life to grow in your relationship with Him? What areas of your life need God's power to change? Are you willing to follow God wherever He may lead because you know He wants what's best for you? Awesome. And I think Tom's going to close this in prayer.
Dear God, thank you for who you are. Thank you for how much you care about us. Thank you for giving your life, for sending your Son, Jesus, to give His life for us. God, please help us to realize that there's more important things in life than just going about day to day. Yeah, God, I pray that we would see you, that we would meet you, because when we meet you, that's when our life is made full. God, I pray that as we go on from here, that you would be in our hearts and in our minds, that you would give us strength to go about each day.